Please interrupt me throughout this entire proceeding. This is not professional at all. This is casual. This is a chance to learn. So for those of you who maybe you've been following my journey, maybe you've been coming to every event I've ever done, Marge, because you're just the stalwart bastion of the arts and we would all be lost without you. I've been publishing novels traditionally since 2013. The Lake and the Library was my first book. I wrote it when I was 16, and I had visions of grandeur of being a famous best-selling globetrotting author with no financial concerns ever again while I mowed my parents' lawn. And that I have actually had some of those experiences. I've been lucky enough to go to New York and to San Diego and to talk about my work as an author, but also my work in the publishing industry. So in addition to writing books, I've also been working in the industry as an editor. I've been an editor, a salesperson, a typesetter, graphic designer, so the person who puts together the printing file to make a book and then stresses about every single error that needs to be fixed during pre-flight. I've done book cover design. That's actually what I've won the Aurora Award for. I've talked on probably thousands and thousands of hours of panels and workshops, just kind of talking about books because I really like them. I've also been a bookseller very briefly, so getting books into people's hands. And so I've seen it from every angle, and I've seen how much books affect people. People that write them, the people who I get to read their books, and they are terrified of my notes afterwards. And some of them, and I will not dox anyone, and it was a very long time ago, but who had to add therapy sessions to their docket after working with me, though I really meant no harm. So writing is deeply personal and sharing stories is deeply personal. And I work out a lot of personal things when I'm writing. So I try to think about that when I'm working with other authors. For instance, this new book that I wrote, it was a really tough book to write. I wrote it last summer. I wrote it really second guessing myself at every turn because it was the first book that I had written since having a kid, which is a completely different type of project management from books. At least when the book is in your hand and the author has written it and you've done the edits and it's sent to production, it's out of your hands forever until the next one. But unfortunately with kids, they are in your hands forever. And not unfortunately, but it is very an all-encompassing role and it's quite different. And being a writer requires actually a lot of silence and a lot of time on your own. And when your every single brain cell is committed to family, to career, it's really tough to also fit a book in there. And to my dismay, which is becoming a habit, is every time I pitch a book to my publisher and they ask if it's a series, I just say yes, without there being, there's kind of an inkling, but not a huge plan. And with this series, I promised 5 books. So we're just on a fun road here. But yeah, I found writing The Door in Lake Mallion quite difficult. I was working a full-time job for the Hallmark Channel. Not a lot of folks, they would imagine that writing is my full-time job, but from all the things that I've already mentioned, it's not. It hasn't ever been. Because I just like helping other people and I like paying the bills. But so I was really devoted to doing that. I'm also the artistic director for the Prairie Comics Festival, which is a whole other thing, a whole other bag another industry that I work in, creating spaces for people who are up and coming and who don't kind of have this immense privilege that I have being a published author. I try to work really hard to make more spaces for people to share their work. So I'm very busy. And when I was writing this book in cafes, in my backyard, at 2 a.m., I have an entire Word document on my computer that's about 120,000 words that is not in this book. It's all from stuff that's been excised out of it, that I second guessed, that I rewrote, that I cut out, but I kept everything because just in case I needed it, I would have it. So I have a whole other giant book just sitting on my hard drive that has nothing to do with this one. Because I was just really concerned because, like I said, it was my first time coming back to artistic practice in a public way after having my son. And I was just worried I wasn't going to be able to do it because there's a lot of, and it doesn't really get talked about a lot in the arts, but there's a lot of depersonalizing that goes with changing, your role, and your identity as an author can kind of get lost in your voice. And also the main character is he's like me in a lot of ways. Dunstan Cord is the main character of The Door in Lake Mallion. He's a big dreamer. He has really big, big expectations for himself, and he really thinks he's going to achieve everything that he's planning to achieve, and that nothing's going to stop him. And but unfortunately, kind of right at the top of the book, in the middle of having a very grandiose fantasy, he's a big theater geek. He's big into huge musicals, big kick lines. He imagines that he's going to be front and center on that stage. He learns that his vision is failing, and in a couple of months, he's going to be completely blind. And so in a desperate attempt to fast track his dreams, he's running away from his small town to the big city. He's got it all planned out. He's gonna get his big break. He's gonna work behind the scenes. One day, someone's just gonna hear him singing and dancing on stage, and then he's gonna get discovered, and it's all gonna be fine. But unfortunately, the town bullies, who are also maybe the children of, sort of cultists, throw him into the lake. That the town is built around, thinking that if they do, they're going to change the luck of what's kind of happened in this town. And Dunstan falls to the bottom, and he finds this door that the town has kind of folklorized, and he goes through, and he finds himself in a city of lizard people, but they're very refined and they're very cultured, and the whole city runs on an energy source, which is based on people being entertained. And so entertainers are held in high regard because if they can power the enormous mushroom network that kind of keeps this city together, then you can kind of be top dog. And normal people would be kind of terrified out of their brains that this is happening to them, but Dunstan sees an opportunity, and he kind of joins up with a vagabond, Prince Ben, who's also on the run from the authorities, and they team up so that Dunstan can kind of get what he wants. But the more he indulges in this kind of superpower that he's found that he has down here, the more corrupted he becomes, and the more corrupted that his dreams become. So I've just revealed that this is something very personal to me. Because I was a very grandiose teenager who was I expected that I was going to write a book and be famous, and it was going to be accepted, and I was going to become a bestseller, and I made my writing name to reflect those authors that I was, really enamored with, and I was going to be exactly like them. And I'm 35 now, and I was 16 then, and I've had, I've had a lot of really great opportunities, and I'm still going, but I mean, there are some opportunities I still don't have. I don't have an agent. I do it all myself. I'm privileged that I'm in the industry, so I can see behind the curtain, and I can kind of work with all the relationships that I've spent 11 years building. But I'm, still striving. And so this book is kind of about that, and kind of about what can happen if you let your dreams and your very grandiose ideas kind of take the wheel. And how disappointment can actually be the enemy. So that's what this book is about. It's very light. It's very fun. There's a lot of musical numbers, and there's it's funny, it stars in Mount Quixx. When I go to a convention and I hand sell it, I sell it as, it's a very low stakes, sort of like small town murder mystery fantasy. And I tried to do that with this. And I was on the audiobook meeting, and my editor kept saying, well, it's not really that low stakes, because you try to collapse a whole kingdom under this lake, and that's going to take half of the continent with it. And it's well, again, I was working out a lot of stuff. And what I've had a lot of fun with this series is they all take place in the same world of Brindlewatch, just completely fictionalized. And and there are monsters, and there's magic, and all these made up towns and cities, and I've had to create a whole document to keep track of it all. But every story is its own capsule story. So you can read The Stars of Mount Quixx and enjoy it, and then you can move on to this one, and it's new characters, new place in Brindlewatch. There are some cameos, there are some, tiny little Easter eggs and references, but you don't necessarily have to read the first one. Enjoy this one. And yeah, Ariel Gordon, if she's watching, she has infected me with mushroom madness. So there is quite a lot of just giant mushrooms and just a lot of imagery that I've never explored before. So yeah, I've also been doing a lot of school visits lately. I was asked to come back to my high school, which is quite interesting because that's where I started writing when I was in high school. And I've been asked to come back by my teachers to talk to their students who are interested in becoming writers. And I didn't really think much of it, and I had done a bunch of library visits with teens, and they're really interested in listening, but they don't want to talk to me. They don't even want to look at me, really, while I'm talking to them, which I understand. I get it. I'm still kind of there, and I'm an adult. So I wasn't really expecting any hard-hitting questions or things that were going to actually make me just like, all of a sudden I felt 16 again. But one of them asked me, do you ever regret the path that you've chosen as an author? Because it doesn't sound that financially rewarding. And I was like, you're 14. How dare you? And I had to like stop myself and really consider my answer before I just tried to check it off as a task. Just answer the question and move on. In the end, I'm not a big best-selling author and I'm not a celebrity. I've let that go many years ago, now that I kind of understand publishing. But what the benefit that I have found being an author has been sharing every single trade secret that I've been embroiled in for 11 years with as many people as possible, as free and accessible as possible. And when it comes down to it, I started writing for myself. I'm lucky that books are a thing that are shared, and that's, literature has been part of our shared culture since we developed culture and civilization. But in the end, I did it for me, and I'm just glad that people like reading my weird S-H-I-T and connect with it, and connect with the experiences that I have, that I put down on the page still. And I'm always just, and it was like a very sweet, like earnest question. And this girl really just, in high school, all you're being shouted out as your future, your future, your future. And I'm sure that's the place it was coming from. But I still feel like that teenager who is just still getting started and having fun with writing. And the hard lessons that you learn is that you just don't take yourself too seriously. Just get writing. If you've written anything, you're a writer. Don't wait for someone to tell you when your writing is good enough to share it with others, because you're never going to know unless you do it. And I'd say probably the most stuff that I've encountered in doing workshops and panels with just general folks is a lot of regret. A lot of, I spent my life second guessing, and I have a novel in my drawer and I just never did anything with it. Because just imagine that no one wanted to hear it. I'm sure no one wants to hear about these lizards in this underground city, but guess what? I still wrote about them, and now you can buy it and read it. And I wanted to read it, so I wrote it. So yeah, I just really hope that from all of the launches I've done and all of the events that I've done and all of the things that I've organized, the takeaway is that doing something like this is within anyone's reach. And getting a book publishing contract is great. I love my publisher. They've been with me since day one. My editor had to read like 1,000-word email back after she was like, I'm really interested in the book, tell me more. And I just word vomited in an email to her. And her response was, wow, that was really thorough, smiley face. And so my publishers have had to put up with, but also have shaped me as an author, as well as an editor. It's informed how I speak to new writers as well. But there are other avenues to getting your book out there. There is self-publishing. There is going to conventions, craft fairs, other kind of open events where you have a table and you stand behind it and you meet people. People who maybe never would interact with your work, even though it is traditionally published. But if you look around this beautiful bookstore, there are thousands of titles in here. How else are people going to discover who you are unless you kind of go out there? Gone are the days where you can just do a book launch. You're like, well, I'm done. Done marketing, done meeting people. I go to conventions all the time on my own steam, and I have displays of my books, and people walk up to it and they say, well, I've never heard about you before. And I'm like, great, because books never go bad. They don't expire. I'm still selling The Lake in the Library, even though there's maybe only 15 copies left in circulation at 5,000. You know, they're going into like reprints for it. And it's still new to someone. And even though it's a writing voice that I don't have anymore, and I've really grown as a creator, and I sometimes, you know, my shoulders go up to my ears when someone says, oh, I read it and I loved it. Because authors are very self-critical, if you haven't been able to tell yet. It still has meaning to someone, and I don't get to decide what it means to people. I just write the book, I know what it means to me, and when I've handed it off, now it's the reader's turn, and I'm done. My job is done. So yeah, that's what I guess I just hope to give with this new book. My last little thing I'm going to just mention before I go into a little reading here, and then we move on to signing, is that Icon, I think 2 years ago, I had a table, and a young man walked by, and he was about 23, and he just walked by, looked at my books, and then he stopped, and he looked back, and he zeroed in on the lake in the library. He was like, wait a minute, you wrote this? And I was like, yeah. Because people think I'm a publisher because I just have so many books on the table now. And he said, I was in a book club at McNally Robinson reading this book when I was 14. And I was like, oh, and I aged visibly in front of him. And he was like, I didn't have anything in common with anyone else in that group, but we still talk to this day because we were all united in the experience of reading your book. And I was like, don't go into any more detail than that, because I don't want to know that this is a hate group that just like, we're all bonded by slagging how bad this book was. But he was very sweet, and he was like, yeah, and you came to the we had a meeting after we had all finished it, and you came and you talked to us. And I was like, yes, I remember that. You all grilled me senselessly, and I walked away just like stiffened, like I'd been slapped. I was like, oh, they were so critical. But he had this like life-changing experience because of the book, and I completely forgot about coming to McNally to talk to this group, but it had, become part of the tapestry of his life. So I'm so happy that that happened for him. Yeah, so books they change the author who writes them and gives them to you, and they change the people who read them. And I'm so privileged that I get to keep coming back all the time because I just keep writing them, especially to this store and this community, and to share it with you. So thank you so much for being part of that, because otherwise, I would probably still be reading them if there was no one here tonight, but it really does help make me feel like it is having an impact, still has value. So thank you for that. Before I go into the reading, does anyone have any hard-hitting publishing questions that you want to ask me? Because I have 7 hats from the publishing industry. And if you don't have them now, oh, sure. The runner is coming.
I've written a couple of books.
Yes,
and,
you have, yeah.
People keep asking me for audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best platform to publish an audiobook on, in your opinion?
In my opinion. Well, I've been kind of hands-off with audiobooks because ECW produces them in-house. Many years ago, they did used to work with an audiobook publisher. So there are a lot of services out there that can help you on the production side, because there is a whole, you know, trying to find a reader, trying to find the best people to actually do the recording and then produce the results. And it can be costly. It can be upwards of like $2,000 to $3,000 as a setup cost. But as far as platforming it goes, that's also kind of getting into distribution. And distribution is tough when you're self-published. So yeah, my advice there is to look into, like Audible is one of the bigger ones. However, you can also get your audiobooks into libraries as well, and kind of seeking out those channels through the Libby app. But yeah, that's a whole ball game I haven't been super involved with on the self-publishing side.
Thanks.
I've also been very lucky with audiobooks because my publisher involves me at every step. And they come to me with, you know, they're like, okay, well, we're getting ready into the audiobook production. Who do you imagine would read this book? And for the Stars and Mount Quixx, I was just like, a British female voice. Someone who sounds like Katrina Balfe, you know, from Outlander. And they were like, challenge accepted. And they went out and they found 3 readers who sounded exactly like what I had suggested. They were like, now pick one. It's like, oh, but they're all so good. And they all read the same passage, and you just kind of sit with them, and you just, and then there's like a huge email chain being like, I don't know, they're all so great. And it's just such a cool experience. And it's so neat that my publisher involves me in all those steps, because a lot of publishers don't. They're very much like, you wrote the book, you gave it to us, you signed the contract, bye. We'll see you at the other side. But ECW is, you know, they asked me who I wanted to design the covers. And I know lots of people, and I know lots of books that I like and how they look. And I just recommended Von Brooklyn. They're most well known for 1,000 Doors in January, their cover for that one, and Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. And they were available, and so they're doing all the covers for all of 5 of my books. So again, super lucky. But the audiobook for this one, it was between the current narrator, who's really great. He sounds exactly like Dunstan Court, so he was perfect casting. But it was between him and this other gentleman who had like this great like Cajun accent, like so good. And I could just sit and listen to him just read like bad memes. But we decided to go with the current narrator. I can't remember his name. We had a really great meeting though. And he's really lovely. And he was like, if you ever draw any of your characters, can you just send them to me? Because I just want to see them. So anyway, sorry, that was kind of rambling. Any other questions? Here we go.
You alluded to the notion of, I'll pitch 5 books without preparation. Can you tell more of that story?
Yes, I did a Pachakucha talk about this once, about how writing is just kind of artfully lying. And it is really, but pitching the books was even more artful lying. I won't go wax too on about this, but my first series, The Realms of Ancient, it was 3 books, started with Sign of the Fox, Children of the Bloodlands, The Brilliant Dark. And that was my second book after The Lake in the Library. And I handed it over and they said, wow, you ended this on a cliffhanger. Sounds like a series. And I was like, yes. Yes, of course it does. Of course it is. Okay, great. What are the sequel names? And I just fired off titles that meant nothing, that were just like, they sound really cool. And they included them all in the contract because they were like, well, if we're doing a multi-book deal, we have to have the titles in there. At the time, maybe they said they don't have to be final, but in my mind, I was like, these have to be the titles that I use. And then before The Sign of the Fox came out, I was like, I'm not gonna have to deal with this for a year, so it's fine. And they came to me and said, do you have a draft of book 2? Because we need to start working on it right now. And the first book hadn't even come out. And I let out a really high-pitched noise that can only be heard by dogs and like, very rare insects. And I wrote the second book in a month, and I will never do that again. But then I decided I was gonna do that again when they asked me about Stars of Mount Quixx. What was different in that situation was that I had written the Stars of Mount Quixx a long, long time ago. And I put it away in a drawer because I just had this inkling that I wasn't the right writer yet to finish it. I had 100 pages of it, and I was like, I don't know where it's going. I'm just going to put it away, and I'll come back to it later. And I did, and I finished it, and I was like, well, that's great. I would love to spend more time in this world. So using my publisher acumen, I wrote fake back cover copy for all of the sequels, which is basically a summary with titles that, again, were made up on the fly. So that when it did come time for me to send the Stars of Mount Quixx to my publisher, I did have a plan. But if you were listening when I was talking about how hard it was to write this book, it wasn't a very detailed plan. It was what you read on the back of the book. It wasn't, how does everyone get to ABC? How does it conclude? How does it wrap up? So yes, I do have to get better at planning. But there's just such a rush making big commitments, and stress is such a good creative motivator. So I'm not sure if I've been cured of that quite yet. Thank you, Gregory. Anyone else? Again, we can maybe, I don't know what time, how much more time we have here. Oh, oceans of time, as Gregory would say. So I'll get into the reading. I'll get into the reading, and then if you still have questions after, fire them at me, or you can fire them at me in the signing line. Okay, so I'm going to read from the part where Dunstan has been thrown into the lake, and this door has opened, and he has noticed that it's open even though he's basically drowning, and it's basically sucked him in. So he wakes up in a completely different place, and he just kind of comes to terms with that, and then he and Prince Ven have their little meeting. Let's get into it. Also, what I really love about this book is that all of the section breaks are little mushrooms. A+ design. Dunstan wasn't wishing for much. He was barely conscious yet, and as he came closer to waking, he could only think, my head, I can't wear fabulous tiaras if my head's been caved in. He groaned, clutching it, slowly peeling himself from the cold surface his face was stuck to. His aforementioned head was not caved in, thankfully, just a bit of post-traumatic drama. He was shivering, soaked, and coughing up the brackish water that had been sloshing around his lungs. When he took a breath and his heavy eyes opened, he saw clearly. This shocked him more than what he saw, that his vision wasn't blurred as usual, that he could see far, see every sharp detail, and the absence of his thick glasses made his face feel light for the first time in years. I must have lost him in the lake. But when the shock of seeing passed, Dunstan had to come to terms with the sprawling black rocks that stretched for miles below him, glowing an eerie, twinkling green. He faltered backwards, remembering fully the lake, the pull of the water, and the door that had swallowed him. The door! Staring up, Dunstan saw that a ways above was likely where he'd fallen out, a column of perfectly symmetrical, shining dark rock, shaped like a passage, whose facets had clipped open and admitted him from the other side. Top side? Dunstan looked down again at the rocks beyond, heart racing. Squint. He certainly could see, but he couldn't be seeing right. Beyond the seemingly deserted landscape he found himself in were more cliffs and plinths covered in those dazzling lights, yet there was something uniform about it all, clustered, engineered. It couldn't be, but a city? He clutched his forearms as the chills set in, as much from being soaked as from the tangibility of this weird dream. He swore that in the distance he could hear music and the sounds of a metropolis, and a longing to go towards it. You know, this isn't unexpected, he said to absolutely no one at all, shivering and giddy and pacing. After all, soliloquies were his specialty. I mean, death will do this to a brain. Generate endless fantasies, make you think you're experiencing them, and probably in my last moments, you'd think I'd be reliving the moonlight sequence from See You on the Other Side, which I'd prefer, honestly, to a wild nightmare about local door lore and Black Rock City. Well, I'd actually prefer not to die if I get to choose. So wake up, wake up. Dunstan stopped smacking his temples for a second to glance back up. Nothing happened. His head definitely hurt. So maybe he was already awake, but still in the dream. And if he was following the dream's logic, and that moss was somehow right, then he'd gone through the fabled door in Lake Mallion. So was he underneath Lake Mallion now? And closer to hand or foot, as he stared at his sneakers, he realized he hadn't been spat out onto one of these onyx cliffs, which jutted out like teeth in his immediate vicinity. Somehow he was standing on lacquer-chipped wood, on a deck to be precise, the deck of a trawler, balanced precariously in a broken ribcage of rock, and in the glowing dark he could see in faded paint above the bridge, the darling mermaid, the missing ship from 15 years ago. Dunstan felt his face crack as he backed away, clapping. Oh, sure, this is too good. Then he shouted upwards as if he could be heard. You got your wish, Moss. Here I am, making up for Reeve Griss's many mistakes. Don't see him around, though. Would be happy to bring him back up if I could. He clenched his lake-drenched hair, looking for a way down, a way off, a way out, trying to stop the hysterical grin from climbing, still trying to wake himself up. Then Dunstan backed up into something solid and hardly had a chance to turn around before the something grabbed hold of him, pinning his arms. And it was Moss and his cronies all over again. But this time Dunstan screamed, kicked out, and smashed his head upwards with all the panicked strength he had left. Stalak, the attacker said. It came out like a swear word. Dunstan didn't stick around to find out. The grabber let go long enough to clutch their face. Dunstan hit the ground running and raced around the bridge to the aft of the busted-up trawler, where the lake ladder would be, and unable to find it, scrambled over the rail. But something sharp had found grip in the t-shirt at Dunstan's back, swinging him in a circle and sending him crashing back onto the deck. When he tried to get up again, an enormous boot pressed into his stomach, holding him in place. Its owner bent over him with a long spear pointed at his eyes. Okay. Dunstan caught his breath, tried to take in his attacker, but they blended into the dark, glowing haze, head to boot in black. No discernible face behind what looked like a mask with goggles. I'm here, I'll stay, could have just said please. The face didn't move. Nervous humor couldn't penetrate that stare, the one Dunstan could only imagine. Then he swallowed, trying to figure out what angle to take here. Dunstan squinted. Reeve Griss, he whispered, is that you in there? The attacker flinched, paused at the name of the disappeared boy. Then the boot pressed harder. Dunstan squawked. Look, okay, it was an accident. The door, there was this light, and I fell. He grunted, trying to wrench the boot off him. You know, I could be much more coherent if you'd stop crushing me to death. The face, if Dunstan could call it that, came uncomfortably closer, and Dunstan could see his reflection in the dark glass of the goggles, but nothing more. The door? The voice was muffled, a nasal croak. Dunstan felt himself nodding, one part of his brain shutting out this whole nightmare scenario, the other clinging to whatever shred of reason he had left. Yes, it opened and I, bam! The attacker didn't respond, save for the sound of clicking somewhere unseen. Well, here I am, but I don't want to be here. Who would? So I'll go back, somehow, or else I'll be dead soon and you won't have to worry about a thing. Dunstan would be reduced to a carnival corn dog in less than a second with one jab of that stick. He rearranged his face, softening it as he pressed a palm into the boot, crushing his ribcage. I promise I'm not a hazard. I swear it on my stupid, broken heart. A quick tilt of the head, which Dunstan noticed was pointed, a sound like a cicada shuffling its carapace. Then the stick was carefully withdrawn, and Dunstan was pulled gently to his feet by a gloved hand. He shuddered, dusting himself off. Thanks, Long arms snatched him, pulled him up and close, and before Dunstan could react, he was squeezed and coughing. His attacker was hugging him. It worked, they crooned, twirling him around, the large goggled head pressing into Dunstan's shoulder. Dunstan was on the verge of being twirled a third time when he managed to shimmy away. I think you might have the wrong someone, he stammered, dizzy, but the masked stranger decided to keep twirling and celebrating on their own. Dunstan started as he caught sight of a massive, scaled, spear-like tail whipping out from the split in the dazzling duster coat. I can't believe it finally happened. The door heard me. The stranger held their head in their hands, incredulous, pausing, running a calculation. But if you're here, then that must mean... The hand snatched Dunstan's shoulders, the pointed head dipping this way and that as it assessed. You must have the meteor light, don't you? Dunstan shrugged away, arms crossing an X in front of him. I don't have anything, literally. All my stuff was taken, and I was thrown into the water, left for dead, and... He screwed his eyes shut, shook his head like there was still lakeweed sloshing around in his skull. Look, this wasn't destiny. It was a setup. Not one I had any involvement in, might I add. If it was, there'd be more dramatic flourishes and maybe some pyrotechnics, at least. Nimbly grabbing Dunstan's gesticulating hands, the goggled person stopped him in his tracks. All right, fast talker. I didn't understand a trice of that, but it sounds like you're lost. The croak seemed a little more even now, the shadow of a grin on the prowl. You called me something earlier, a name that isn't mine. Are you looking for someone? Dunstan reclaimed his hands, his heart slamming as he was gently pressed into the cabin of the trawler, the splitting wood scratching at his back. No, he said, trying to smile the lie off to make it easier to digest. He cleared his throat. If this were a near-death delusion, which it most definitely had to be, it meant he was in control, for once. He straightened his back. Why? Have you seen anyone come by here in the last 15 years? Then he jabbed a finger into the stranger's chest, trying to ignore that it was scaly. And who are you? Why are you so deeply in my bubble? The stranger took a step back on the defense. Then he clapped his own cheek. Oh, that's right. Where are my manners? The tall stranger bent over, the huge tail swishing so fast that Dunstan had to leap over it like a jump rope. With a flourish of gold-striped coat, the stranger yanked off their mask and goggles. Dunstan tried to close his throat around the gasp as he stared into the stranger's face. Scaled, elongated, a raptor, a dragon? His mind clawed for descriptors while trying not to close in on itself. The pointed face, a dusty, colorful haze of purple and blue, was covered in gold-flecked markings like fireworks around glittering opal eyes. They blinked sideways around dark slits. The creature bowed, showing a head that came to a point with horns that ringed it like a crown. Prince Van at your service, he said smartly, and you're trespassing in my geodome. Then he shrugged magnanimously, which is fine by me, because I intend to shroom nap you and use you for my nefarious plot to get the bash out of here. Hi, again. Do you have any questions before we move into the signing portion of the evening? Yes?
So you said
There's a lot of running involved in the question period.
so you said you have the titles for the other books in the quintet. What's the next one?
The next one is called The Sleuth of Farron City, and I'm actually writing it right now like a good author in my little stable. So there's The Sleuth of Farron City, The Road to Witching Cross, and The Battle for Brindlewatch is the last one. Boy, there's sure a lot of books I have to write. Oh, it's fine. But remember, I did this to myself, and I will continue to do this to myself, probably until I'm in my tomb. Any other questions? Nancy?
Well, I loved Sign of the Fox.
Oh,
Did
thank
you
you.
say there's a sequel?
Yes.
Yes, I'm gonna get that one.
Oh, good. Yes, the sequel is called Children of the Bloodlands, and Sign of the Fox is like told from first person perspective, but when you get into the second book, it's told from about 8 different character perspectives.
Well, that should be fun.
Yeah, so, and whenever I'm like kind of in a low period at a convention and I'm like, oh, I'll just pick up one of my books and give it a read, I always pick up that one because I don't remember writing it at all. Because like I said, I had to write a whole 135,000 words of it in a month because they kind of compressed the delivery schedule a little bit. But I didn't have as many obligations as I do now, so it was a piece of cake that I will never do again. Yeah. Anyone else? We have time for one more. Okay, well, thank you again for coming. I'm gonna be sitting over there. You can ask me questions quietly in my ear. Yes, thank you again for coming out. Really appreciate your support over the years. Thank you.
We're going to move on to the signing portion of the evening, so feel free to approach the table to the right to get your book signed. And feel free to do so before going to the cash desk, so long as you pay for it at some point, we're all good to go. And thank you again to ECW Press for all of you joining us today, and of course to SM Beiko. And please join us again in acknowledging. Everyone, again, have a wonderful night and get home safe.
Oh.